head south into warmer climates, or simply come down off the plateau. Furthermore, if you have a hole or depression like we had here at the Black Sea, with the lake 400, 500 feet below what it is now, you would have increased temperature by descending into this hole, and you would have gathered humidity and moisture from the evaporation that's going on.
The reason for the Black Sea's lost world filling up with people was becoming apparent.
People were probably drawn to this area around the Black Sea like a magnet because it was an oasis. It was the largest body of fresh water around.
Climate has made it tough elsewhere. People have gathered, but also the animals have felt the same environmental pressures. The birds, the waterfowl. You would have had here a refuge.
There was a slowly accumulating population of people, and they were settling along here, farming, hunting, gathering, trading, mud brick houses, wall paintings. It would have been, a sort of a veritable paradise.
Then there came a time when the unthinkable began to threaten their way of life.
One day in the past, we can envision a community here that might have begun to notice, in a otherwise tideless environment, a steady encroachment of the water on its shore.
Unknown to those who sought sanctuary here, the very lowness that was its appeal was placing it under increasing pressure from the inexorably rising water behind the portal of the Bosphorus. Just a few, sensing danger, may have begun to make preparations, inevitably to the amusement of others.
And then I think the first signs of an environment about to let loose would have been a trembling of the ground, or a subtle sound, a roar.
We're talking about one of the great catastrophes that human beings have ever witnessed. The rate of flow through the Bosporus would have been something on the order of 200 times the amount of water that comes over Niagara Falls. A horrendous cascade, something that probably could have been heard at least 200 kilometers away.
As the effects of the portal burst spread, the flat northern parts of the lowland kingdom would have been covered at up to 1.5 miles a day. Some who became surrounded by the flood would have perished or taken to boats.
You would struggle to get your goats, your sheep, onto some kind of a raft. Or you may have put them on your boats you've already built for fishing, the boats you've built for trade.
Other escapees would have been forced to move up river valleys, such as the Danube and the Dnieper to the north, or to the south, back onto the Anatolian plateau.
They have to take everything and everybody with them, as much food as they can, wander up these rivers into an unknown land, and somehow survive. It must have been an extremely difficult time for them.
To prove there was such an exodus up the valleys leading away from the Black Sea, Ryan and Pittman look for evidence of newcomers in these valleys.
We are learning from archaeologists that during the period immediately after the flood, many tells that had previously been abandoned were reoccupied.
And the new settlers were often culturally distinct, different people from those who had been there previously.
In the reoccupation, the archaeologist always sees the evidence of newcomers, a new culture, a new way of building houses, a new way of doing pottery.
The tell of Hajular in central Anatolia is reoccupied, and one of the world's first face pots is found there. Is this the work of the lost people of the Black Sea? Other possible newcomers appear in southern Mesopotamia, including the Ubaids, who have special significance for Ryan and Pittman.
And what's interesting about the Ubaids is they are the ancestors to the Sumerians, who are the people who write down the legend of the flood, story of Gilgamesh.
Gilgamesh eventually found its way into the Old Testament, the story of Noah's flood. Bill and I have studied the book of Genesis very carefully. The most popular idea amongst archaeologists as to the origin of the flood is that it was an over-the-bank flooding in the Tigris-Euphrates river valleys, and that this made its way into the mythology. There are several problems with that idea. The first one is that there is a warning.
And God said, "For in 7 days I will send rain upon the earth, 40 days and 40 nights."
Traditionally, Noah's flood has been viewed as a flood of rivers such as the Tigris and Euphrates. But those floods, and they happen often, they certainly happen in prehistory, come without warning.
The second problem is that the people in the biblical story packed as if they were going away forever, as if they would never be returning.
Every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark, to keep them alive.
People who are flooded out in river valleys know that the flood isn't going to last more than a few days. They pack enough to sustain them. When the flood is over, they come back to reclaim their land.
Thousands and thousands of floods over human history in themselves don't accumulate to a flood myth. It is the flood of all floods, the super flood, that works its way into myth. And the Black Sea is that super flood.
So Ryan and Pittman believe that as well as dating the flood of Noah and Gilgamesh to the time of the Black Sea flood, they have found the way the story came from the Black Sea, carried in the memory of those fleeing the portal collapse. They are aware that these new revelations are still little more than a web of conjecture, so they continue looking for proof.
I think
Probably
so.
right about
I
here. We
think
changed
that's
step.
what these are. Start of profile.
Yeah, right, okay.
Then, a new development. A phone call from the director of a dig just south of the Black Sea at Ilapanar. He'd found something of interest. The Dutch archaeologist Jacob Rudenberg, whose ancient tell Ryan and Pittman had already visited, had unearthed a new settlement of pit dwellers nearby. It seems that they had arrived on the site several hundred years after the old tell had been abandoned.
For me, it is clear that the people we see here were not the direct descendants of the people who built the village with those nice, sophisticated houses. So they must have come from another place.
Rudenberg's team have found a human likeness on the pit dweller's site. Could this have been fashioned by exiles from the Black Sea? Rudenberg had arranged for Ryan and Pittman to compare the pots from both the old tell and this new settlement in his workshop. He said they were in for quite a surprise. On these shelves, Rudenberg had laid pottery in chronological order. These are the earlier pots from the abandoned tell, and above this shelf are the later ones from the newly discovered pit-dwelling site. It's significant that there's almost no similarity between the two groups, and the date associated with this change, around 5500 BC. Almost exactly the same date as Ryan and Pittman have proposed for the Black Sea flood. The problem is that Ryan and Pittman are straying into an academic field that is outside their expertise. They're geologists, not archaeologists. They turn to a world expert on the pottery of the area, Dr. Douglas Bailey from Cardiff University.
Is this representing how they might have painted their bodies or tattooed?
I think so, yes. Tattooed their skin or
They
drawn
meet
with
him
red
at
ochre.
Sinop on the Black Sea coast and show him the pottery on video.
But especially after this 5,500 BC. Forget the Black Sea.
Bailey is able to give a wide perspective on all the cultures around the Black Sea who might have experienced the flood.
Well, it could be. I mean, we have similar face spots all the way up the Black Sea coast.
Oh, really?
And
Yes.
you find them in southern Romania just like this.
What happened next was one of those rare moments of revelation, delivered quite nonchalantly, that can happen when academics from different disciplines get together.
Perhaps, yes. But I think that enough is known about Anatolian prehistory to say that there is a dramatic change after 5,500 and something else is happening. Just as in
It seems that archaeologists are increasingly agreeing that there was a dramatic change around 5500 BC, the time of the flood. It's just that nobody had been able to figure out why. Now to show him the new pots found by Rudenberg.
As you can see.
Well, you can see it's very different, isn't it?
Yes.
It's got different shapes.
Yes.
And the tall-necked one has this finger fluting or ridging.
Yes.
You're talking about a liquid container, perhaps? Or? Okay. So what we've got is we've got something very different happening at this site after 5,500.
Exactly.
Radically different. They're
Yeah.
off the tell.
Do you think this conforms to our hypothesis?
Well, I think you've got something, but you're not quite there yet. I got to keep you going at it. You know, you're going to get it down in the bottom of the Black Sea. You got to get wet. Now, I and many other archaeologists, when we first heard about the flood theory, we put the phone down. But when you start thinking about it, and you put your prejudices aside, you say, look, here's some hard data. They've actually given us something to work with, which we can bat back and forth, qualify, change, perhaps reject. But at the moment, perhaps it's the best explanation we've got. One of the next things we're going to have to do is go back down in the Black Sea. We need to know more about what's on the bottom of the Black Sea now.
Traveling around the rim of the Black Sea, Ryan and Pittman search for people with local diving experience. They set off to Istanbul, following up a lead that may help answer Douglas Bailey's challenge to concentrate on underwater investigation. They've heard that there's a Bulgarian archaeologist, Kristina Angelova, who's been carrying out just such research. They meet her back in Istanbul at a waterfront cafe. Kristina and her team have been diving off the Black Sea port of Sozopol in Bulgaria for over 10 years.
A lot of finds discovered by fishermen in their fishing nets.
What's more, she is clutching some video cassettes. The world beneath the Black Sea was about to be opened up to them. Populated today not by the people of Noah, but by jellyfish. With a metal grid reference system over her digs, Kristina's team excavates with the help of a vacuum tube.
There are the remains of our ancestors.
They've discovered what appear to be wooden post dwellings. Dendrochronology counts and measures the thickness of tree rings. With this information, Kristina had those all-important dates for Ryan and Pittman.
The earliest settlements which we have discovered underwater are of the age of about 4000 BC.
A disappointment for the two scientists. The date was too recent to be before the flood of around 5500 BC. Even more recent sites, such as Kristina's, have sunk beneath the surface as the bottom of the sea was compressed by the weight of the 50 trillion tons of water that poured into the basin when it was flooded. Somehow, they've got to get deeper. But to explore villages doomed by the flood, they need an oceanographic research ship with advanced technology. The arrival in the Black Sea of the French ship Le Sirois caused great excitement. It was ideally suited to the task. Ryan encourages the team to search along the ancient submerged river valley of the Danube, a freshwater artery along which ancient people would have settled. Launching the sonar chirp profiler, which bounces a variety of sound frequencies off the bottom, reproduces the familiar blanket of mud Ryan had seen much earlier on the Russian ship,